How you doing?
Yeah.
Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another episode of Beyond the Script. We are here tonight with Fresh, Natural, and Live. We want you to keep it fresh, natural, and live throughout your whole life. And I'm here with the usual suspects, Dr. Celeste Palmer and Dr. Floyd Atkins. Our other two panelists are taking the night off. But we have a very, very special guest tonight, a friend and colleague of mine that I'm going to introduce to you in just a minute. But as you know, every week we present a topic and we want you to come in and introduce or give us your questions or insights to your life. We are talking about nutrition in the heart tonight. However, we want you to submit questions on anything that's on your mind, that's on your heart, and we'll try to address those. Even if we don't address them live in the discussion, I usually see them in the chat room and address them on the side panel. Sometimes the questions may be so interesting, we may take time and address it later, and I'll state as much in the chat room. So as you know, Dr. Palmer is our board-certified pediatrician. She practiced allopathic pediatrics, but also has an interest in nutrition as a means of healing her patients. And she's been using a plant-based diet for many years to treat patients in the pediatric center. Dr. Floyd Atkins is a podiatrist, a retired podiatrist, and he has an interest in natural medicine and helping his patients evolve naturally and healing their disease naturally through environmental means, through supplements. He and his wife, Dr. Pam Atkins, work at the Center for Natural Healing here in Houston, Texas, and they are passionate about treating their patients with nutrition and natural means and natural supplements. But as I said earlier, tonight we're talking about nutrition in the heart, and our special guest is Dr. Kim A. Williams. Dr. Kim Williams is a master of the American College of Cardiology and served as the president of the American College of Cardiology from 2015 to 2016. He is currently a trustee of the organization. He graduated from the University of Chicago in 1975. He has board certifications in internal medicine, cardiovascular diseases, nuclear medicine, nuclear cardiology, cardiovascular computed tomography. He has served as faculty of the Fisker School of Medicine, the Wayne State University School of Medicine in Detroit, and since 2013 at Rush University Medical Center in Chicago, where he is head of cardiology department. Dr. Williams has served as president of the American Society of Nuclear Cardiology, chairman of the Coalition of Cardiovascular Organizations, and chairman of the board of Association of Black Cardiologists, among other positions. Dr. Williams has been vegan since 2003. After being selected as incoming president of the American College of Cardiology in 2014, he published an essay on his reason for being vegan and his belief in cardiovascular benefits of veganism in MedPage Today. There was much public discussion on his views and motives. So without further ado, we're going to bring Dr. Williams into the studio. Hello, sir. How are you doing today?
Well, thank you very much. Really great to be here. And it's great to have an opportunity to talk to you folks.
Thanks. That last part of the discussion, and we want to get into your discussion, but it's quite interesting. And I saw a little bit of that when you published your reason for being vegan. But, in your publication, there was much public discussion of his views. I think there's a very politically correct way of saying that. Can you share with us some of that public discussion when you became vegan and announced that came out? Because, you're very credentialed and very well entrenched in the established part of medicine. So to come out and talk about plant-based nutrition was quite a little bit of going against the grain. Share some of that experience.
It really, I just had an LDL cholesterol that ticked up to 170 when my kids stopped playing national tennis tournaments and I wasn't playing tennis twice a day every day. And it turns out that the month that I found that out, at American College of Cardiology meeting in 2003, there was a wonderful publication by David Jenkins, who actually published a portfolio diet, totally plant-based nutrition, aiming to lower cholesterol. I actually have that in my slide deck. But there also had a clinical experience of a lady who had a dramatic improvement in her nuclear scan doing the Ornish diet. So with those two things in mind, I went completely plant-based, and I kept it between me, my family, and my patients until I got elected to be in the presidential team and at ACC, and that's when it went to the ACC blog, because they asked me to just write a few paragraphs about why I was doing it. I talked about hypertension, cholesterol, and the like, and therefore, cardiovascular disease. That actually went to MedPage Today, as you mentioned, and that got picked up by New York Times, and all of a sudden I'm the world's vegan cardiologist when we have plenty of guys like you who should be it really did get a lot of publicity and some pushback. There are some, particularly the keto people, that I definitely will talk about during our time together tonight, where there are people who are completely opposed to this. And I just want everybody to look really hard at the science. And hopefully that's what we'll do tonight.
Well, great. Yeah. So I again, thanks for coming in. I got a brief look at your slide deck. You have a lot of data for us. So I'm not going to waste. We're going to bring your slide deck into the picture. And as we talked about before, Dr. Williams, we we'll look at your slide deck, and it's part of the discussion. So I may see something, get excited about, and I'll raise my hand and ask some interesting questions. But otherwise, I'll try to keep my mouth shut.
No worries. The funny part about sharing my screen is that I can't see you anymore. So please go ahead and ask. Just jump on in, and I'll just expect that. So just by way of introduction, I think you have, Baxter, a wonderfully interested audience. So that little green spot on the slide, the editor-in-chief at International Journal of Disease Reversal and Prevention, it's really an honor to serve in that role. And I'm hoping that everyone listening will download or go to www.ijdrp.org. That is the only journal that is completely free. It doesn't have to have advertising in it, and we don't charge the authors, even though it's an open journal. And so please submit your stuff, and it'll get thoroughly reviewed, and hopefully you'll find a lot of stuff. It's not completely like the green vegan journal. It really is prevention. So you'll see stuff in there that has nothing to do with nutrition, but it's all about prevention. So please join us there. The second, great, fantastic. So the second part of introduction, I just want to tell everybody what you asked me to do tonight. You asked me to it's really for four things. How does plant-based diet affect the cardiovascular system? Can a plant-based diet control or reverse cardiovascular disease? And if so, how? And then what effect does consuming saturated fat, which has been in the news lately because of a publication in the form of animal protein, have on the cardiovascular system? And then what do I think about the recently publicized article in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology about saturated fat consumption, promoting it? And so I really I'm going to try to cover all those topics. It may seem like verbal tachycardia, but I'm going to give it my best.
Well, you have a physiologist in the room, so we'll be okay.
Fantastic. So the interesting part is that rule number one, you can't give a lecture during a pandemic without talking about the pandemic. And it just so happens that it dovetails exactly 100% with the topic tonight. What you're seeing is not obviously COVID-19. This is the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918. It lasted for 3 years. There were 675,000 deaths. And I had these in my slide deck for the last really probably 8 years, because I was always saying that this was the last time that heart disease wasn't the leading killer of Americans. And that I was hoping to see that fall to number two. It hasn't yet. And I doubt that COVID is going to take it over. But I really want to talk about the nutritional aspects, because you've heard so much. A lot of your population listening tonight are either African American or serving the African American community, as we do at Rush University and in Chicago. And you've seen this kind of data where there's this very large amount of disparity between the races with COVID-19 mortality. And if you look at the best amount of data that we have in the United States, 128,000 American lives have been lost as of yesterday. And the African-American rate is 2.4 times higher than everyone else, than whites, that is. And this ratio, we've been analyzing it. We've been analyzing it very carefully at Rush. And so far, and obviously I'm not going to show you slides on it because we submitted it for publication, but the data is that when you adjust for the kinds of things that they pointed out in MMWR early on, that is diabetes and obesity and all of the and hypertension, and more recently hyperlipidemia and underlying cardiovascular disease. Those are the things that take a person who gets the COVID infection, and is the difference between them being asymptomatic, mildly symptomatic, hospitalized and in intensive care, hospitalized, intensive care, and intubated, and then mortality. And so these risk factors are the ones that overlap completely with nutrition. And so I'm going to spend this evening talking specifically about them. So starting with obesity, it was interesting that the Wall Street Journal picked an African-American family to talk about how heart attacks are happening in younger Americans. And that was appropriate because the obesity epidemic is a bit more in the Black community. But it's 80 million US adults. It's all about the diet. And if people were doing more fruits and vegetables and whole grains and nuts, you would see less of this. But instead, we're doing the sugary drinks, red meat, refined grains, a bigger meal. It is not evenly distributed. African-American women, it looks like it's only 57%, but if you include overweight, it's almost 80%. And it's a problem that has to do with food choices. And we're very worried about the fact that people in their second and fourth decade are actually choosing fast food every day. So we either have to start cooking better meals, learn more what nutrition is like, or fix all the fast food so they're not actually giving out high calorie density food full of oil, full of animal products, and so that you cannot fill up yourself without actually overeating the calories that you shouldn't be eating. As opposed to this very famous Juliana Heber slide, 400 calories of this and that, 400 calories of vegetables is a lot of space in your stomach and a lot of satiety, but not a lot of calories. Instead, we're supersizing things, and they get bigger and bigger. It's a great marketing ploy, but it's having its effect. Now, can nutrition intervention make a difference? We actually have a lot of data, and some of it is diets that we don't like because there might have some long-term and even short-term bad effects. But what all of these diets actually share is that they are lower in calories. And so it may not be lower in volume of food, but it's definitely lower in calories. In the case of Ornish, that would be a whole food plant-based diet. It's plenty of food, it's just not a lot of calories. And when you do that, you will see a significant difference. And so there have been prospective randomized trials that actually look at over a 6-month period of time. This is Turner and previous studies, and it does appear that the best ones would be vegetarian or completely plant-based or vegan. Now I'm going to switch over and talk about diabetes and hypertension more. Why? Because that really is around the world, not just about COVID, it's about cardiovascular disease and overall mortality. And sure, obesity is coming in 5th on this, but if you get rid of smoking and bad air pollution, you're left with hypertension and diabetes. So I tend to talk about them together. There's plenty of deaths worldwide, particularly cardiovascular deaths that are related to how glucose is handling as well as hypertension. And we have data on nutrition. Some of it comes from the Adventist health studies, such as this particular study, Gary Fraser, taking a look at the Adventist prospective, not randomized, but prospective collective nutrition information and relating it to risk factors. And the all vegan population compared to the lacto-ovo population, and that one's smaller than the non-vegetarian population. So they have plenty of data over plenty of time, and this is what they show. For hypertension and diabetes, if you are trying to avoid being overweight and avoid those diseases, the best strategy is completely plant-based nutrition. It does turn into mortality, not just risk factors. The more vegetarian you are, the longer you live, and the less cardiovascular disease you end up with. And over time, you tend to grow in terms of the percentage of people who are based, as the American diet really tends to extinguish itself either by mortality or conversion. And usually it's someone coming to my office after a heart attack, and we go through it and we say, yeah, you ate that disease, and we're not going to do that anymore, and I can get them to change. The people who are doing a vegetarian diet are lighter, have a more lively life, and they actually live longer by almost a decade. If you look at vegetarian diets in terms of randomized trials, there are loads of them for blood pressure. And on average, you will drop your blood pressure significantly. Some vegetarian diets more than others, particularly at the top, the two completely plant-based diets. And even the ones that have been published, so-called DASH diet, if you segregate the DASH diet into people shown in red here, the people who have very, very low fat and cholesterol, meaning essentially a plant-based diet, they're the ones who have the most dramatic reduction in blood pressure. That did make it into our 2017 hypertension guidelines, where we try to get people to do lifestyle, not drugs. And sometimes you need both, but you should start with lifestyle and cut the alcohol consumption, do more physical activity, lose the weight, lower the sodium to less than 1,500 milligrams, increase the potassium to more than 3,500 milligrams, but have a diet that's rich in whole grains, vegetables, fruits. You do this, you will actually lower your blood pressure substantially.
So, Tim, I'm sorry.
Sure.
You mentioned guidelines. You just showed data showing that a complete plant-based diet has pretty definitive benefits over, diets that are rich in plant foods. I mean, lacto, ovo, vegetarian, etc.
Yeah.
Why can't we recommend just a vegan diet? We understand people may not achieve that, but is there a lack of data? Do we need more data? What's your take on that?
Very well said. And so what we're looking at is the guidelines. It's great to be in the room, great to be an author. I learned so much from these folks, but they will beat you up if you don't have prospective randomized trials with hard outcomes. And so having this graph did influence the guideline writing, but what really influenced them was DASH. And DASH had some fish and DASH had some dairy. It was not very much, and less the better. And DASH shows that. So that's why I show the DASH slide. So yes, we still need prospective randomized trials for all of the risk factors and all of the outcomes that are large and long term. Because everything the big stuff that I'm showing you so far, the large populations, they're actually observational trials. They're long prospective with outcomes, but they're observational.
And that's the one that met that criteria, randomized prospective trials.
Yep, that's right. And so the criticism that people will say, and I could spend the entire hour talking about this. The criticism is that when people like this do a vegan diet, or they agree to do a vegan diet, that they are different people, that they are biased. There's a healthy person bias that goes into it. They're not smoker. They're probably exercising more. Is that cause or effect with the vegan diet? Sure. If you ask Novak Djokovic, early in his career as a tennis player versus recently when he's dominating, he's vegan now. And so he recovers better. But it could be reverse causality. And so until we have the prospective randomized trials, we will always be questioned on this. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about insulin, because insulin is not our friend. We grow up banting and best thinking that it's a wonderful hormone that saves a lot of lives, and you can give it exogenously when somebody's diabetic. But you know what? It's an minute growth stuff you do not want. Central obesity and thickness of vessels and accelerated atherosclerosis. So anything that we do that increases insulin levels, like a carbohydrate load, is going to down the road relate to poorer outcomes for the cardiovascular system. The funny part about this is it's not news. This study from the Nurses' Health Study was actually over 10 years ago. And they showed that if you eat a hamburger, you got a dietary cholesterol load, your mortality goes up. You eat vegetable fiber instead, it goes down. You eat a sugar load, like a donut or something, and you actually have a higher hazard ratio than you would, numerically higher than you would from the dietary cholesterol. So sugar actually may be worse than cholesterol and fat. That dovetails completely with outcome studies that were published in 2014, Journal of American Medical Association. talking about from Inhane's, great data set, looking long time. Again, it's prospective, non-randomized, but they show the more sugar you eat, you get this curvilinear increase in mortality. So don't sugarcoat it.
Real quick on the sugar, I'm not going to spend too much time. I know you have a lot of data, but a lot of sugar items have dairy in them as well as oil, such as the donut that you alluded to.
Absolutely.
And so it's not just a pure sugar, although it's a polyprocessed sugar with an animal protein associated with it, which may make it worse than the cheeseburger.
You hit the nail on the head. People eat food. They don't eat nutrients. And so it's hard, and this will come up again. It can come up during our saturated fat discussion as well. How many times are people eating saturated fat and not eating cholesterol? Who's going to go to their lard and just start spooning it out? We normally don't do that. So when you try to adjust for cholesterol intake or animal protein intake in the model, you still end up in the Nurses' Health Study, but it isn't a prospective randomized trial that's done with a pure nutrient. So you're absolutely right. There's always going to be some error bars around it. So remember that sugar actually can be dyslipidemic, and that it can, you hear people say that it doesn't cause diabetes. Well, not necessarily directly, but indirectly by increasing insulin levels, which will make you grow. It'll make you can take a certain amount of food, but how much of those calories are going to end up in your stool? Believe it or not, the insulin changes all of that. You become much more efficient in absorbing food, which you're then going to store if it's more than what you need. So you can reverse all of this when you lower the sugar in the diet. So let's be about that. Now, one thing that requires special mention in terms of a slide is drinking calories. I see my patients, they're coming and say, I'm doing smoothies now, and that's fine. When they say I'm doing juicing, that's not so fine. They're taking the fiber, throwing it away, and drinking everything else. And that essentially is adding sugar and drinking it. So what's wrong with it? You get an amazing absorption so fast when you drink. And this is why, everybody's had the experience of giving an amp of D50 or having somebody drink orange juice when they're having insulin shock, and they wake right up. It takes seconds. So that's when people are drinking calories, they're getting a response that's almost immediate. And it's just increasing the amount of calories that you're going to consume.
I'll have to share the data we have with our cold pressed juice feast on diabetic patients, because we've had hundreds, thousands of patients we put on cold pressed juice feast for at a time, and we've got pretty good data. In fact, some of my diabetics that I have trouble controlling their diabetes, I put them on a juice feast, and their cholesterol goes down and the lipids. And I don't know if there's enough data on cold pressed juice feasting to really make a comment. I think theoretically you're right. If you got a processed juice, it's going to be bad. But the only data I've seen, and I talked to Michael Greger about this, is that they do observational studies where people say, okay, I use fruit juice versus the whole fruit. But then the fruit juice is a processed pasteurized juice. I just don't know if there's any data on cold pressed juice feast or cold pressed juice detoxes.
So tell me what else they're eating. If you're doing the juice by itself, then that insulin is not going to make you absorb more of the fat from the hamburger.
No, I agree. I hear what you're saying. I don't put them on cold pressed juice in a hamburger. Exactly. So you might have incredible success with that, because the substrate that you're giving them is so much healthier than what they're eating when they're doing a soda with the cheeseburger and fries. But we probably should do that study one day, but that's another story.
There you go. All right. Absolutely. Okay. All righty. So there you go. All right. So I can't talk about sugar without talking about alternative sweeteners. There is data out there saying that they increase mortality. And the sugar sweetened beverages of all varieties are associated with more mortality. It is a little bit better for the artificial ones. And there are 3 that I know of, and with a knowledgeable group like this, maybe you could add to that list. It's stevia, yacon syrup, and erythritol that don't have really large increases in insulin levels, which is what I think as a cardiologist you would like to avoid. Have to also mention the idea that you can intervene on this, that you can start early, do more of a plant-based diet, and the more plant-based diet you do, the more plant-based your diet, the lower the likelihood of developing diabetes. And then if you look at it as an intervention, there is data from Neil Barnard's group where if you want that hemoglobin A1C to improve, put them on a plant-based diet and you will see a significant effect. It's hard to leave this area without mentioning some of the more recent research that was stunning to me about well-being, emotional well-being, less depression, better general health, not just weight, cholesterol, the way a cardiologist would think, hemoglobin A1C and LDL cholesterol. People really do get less depressed and they feel better about themselves when they're doing plant-based diet and they're diabetic. So we need to improve their life expectancy and the quality of life. And we can do that in diabetics by getting rid of the red meat, which is apparently very diabetogenic, regardless of its effects on weight, as well as refined carbohydrates and the consequent insulin resistance. Okay, I need to talk about cholesterol because that got published about 2 weeks ago. That is yet another COVID-related risk factor. And so we didn't have that one at first. It's a recent publication, and we just have to be very respectful that when you have high cholesterol, you are putting your vascular system in trouble. And now with COVID-19, you're risking more mortality. Folks need to understand that when they're eating animal products, they're getting a lot of cholesterol. And when you are eating plants, you are not. There are some animal products that don't have cholesterol, like egg whites. Unfortunately, most people eat egg whites with egg yolks. So if you want to do an intervention to lower cholesterol, this is the one that I took personally because of the month that it was published, where they did a prospective randomized trial, wonderful trial, doing plant sterols, viscose fibers, soy protein, and almonds versus a statin versus a low-fat, old American Heart Association type of diet. And what you can see is that the diet without the statin or the plant-based nutrition didn't affect the LDL cholesterol or the inflammation, the C-reactive protein, very much, but both the statin and the LDL cholesterol fell dramatically with that intervention, with the statin and with the dietary portfolio. So we have we focused on the anti-inflammatory effects of a vegan diet because there's such good data saying that that's what happens. Your C-reactive protein will drop. If you use the American Heart Association diet, it does not. And if you look purely at cholesterol, you have a massive amount of data also put together by Neil Barnard's group that shows you that your LDL is going to drop. Not everybody gets a 50% reduction like I did. Some are only 30, some are only 10, but some are actually even more. And so knowing how sensitive your GI tract is to absorption of cholesterol is important. And the more plant-based you are, the more likely you're going to have a drop in cholesterol. At this point, I have to throw in a word about cholesterol with egg consumption. I mentioned how much there is in an egg. And you'll hear over and over again, I'll talk about it in just a little bit, that people, they can eat eggs and it's going to be fine, the incredible edible. Well, the problem with that is it causes death. And so it's hard to discount this data published by Don Lloyd-Jones and his group, that there's a linear relationship between egg consumption. The higher you go, the more mortality you have. And it's really, where's the cut point? About a half an egg. It might even be lower if you had a larger population with the 17% increase in mortality reaching statistical significance. And I know a lot of the people who want to protect chicken thieving or egg thieving people, leave the chickens alone, don't want to hear that egg whites are okay. And they may not be okay, but in terms of cardiovascular disease, when they adjusted that model for the cholesterol content, there was no more mortality associated with egg consumption. So if people have to do it, and I'm not recommending it, but if they do have to do it, at least dump the yolk. Okay, so now I want to talk about, I'm sorry.
Real quick on LP little a, are you aware of some of the data we have on the LP little a reduction with plant-based diet?
I actually am aware of it, and I'll tell you why. I'm going to, in a few slides, I'm going to show you our first intervention, and everybody was so happy that we dropped LP(a) when they said that there are no dietary interventions, and that do it. Well, guess what? I searched the literature and I found you. So, yeah. Yes, indeed. And so you had about a 10% drop in LP(a), and so did we in a 5-week intervention that I'll talk about in just a little bit. So thanks for that reference. It made it into my manuscript draft, and hopefully we'll be sending that off and getting it published pretty soon.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, 16. Yeah.
How about that? All right. So talking about saturated fat. People, what in the world is SFA? What is saturated fat? Well, just remembering your biochemistry or your organic chemistry, if there's a double bond, one of them, that means it's monounsaturated. If there's two of them or more, then it's polyunsaturated. And if there are no double bonds, then it's saturated fat. And so people say, well, does one change? How do you change one to the other one? Well, one way to do it is to take a, oil like olive oil and do it at high heat. And as you see all at boiling point, you see the double bonds popping, and that's becoming much more saturated fat. People don't usually count that. We've been concerned about fat consumption because of its direct effects on the function of our arteries. And people have talked about this over and over again, and maybe it's a little less if you have shorter chains. But the best way to do it is to lower the fat content of the diet. Now, I'll talk about the new article in a moment, but I want to give you the background of all the things that they discounted, because this is a lot of data. Dee Wang, Frank Yu, this is Nurses Health and Health Professional Follow-Up Studies, 83,000 people. It's hard to discount this data. And what it says, we don't have to worry about trans fats anymore. It's illegal in the United States, Canada, Denmark, and Switzerland. But saturated fat increases mortality, monounsaturated decreases, and polyunsaturated even more. And the interesting part of that is that this follows what happens to the LDL cholesterol pretty much to a T. If you were to replace 5% of your saturated fat with polyunsaturated fat or monounsaturated fat, you'd reduce mortality in their data set by 27%. Now, saturated fat got a shot in the arm, so to speak, by the PURE trial that was published by Salim Yusuf and his group, talking about how carbohydrates were dangerous and associated with more mortality. And well, this was not news. It made news, but it was not news, because I actually showed you that with Nurses Health and a lot of other data that refined carbohydrates are actually more dangerous than anything that we have. And so it was not a surprise that if you replace carbohydrates with polyunsaturated fat, you lower mortality. It turns out that their saturated fat data looked good only because they had a bad comparator. I always like to say that if somebody's going to force you to drink either the cyanide or the arsenic, take the arsenic. You're going to live longer. And so this is and so people shouldn't be doing either, but I definitely would take saturated fat over refined carbohydrates. And that, carbohydrates being refined was actually buried in the methods of the PURE trial, and most people did not see that. But we have lots of data. This is also from the Harvard group, British Medical Journal, a few years ago, talking about saturated fat increase in coronary heart disease. The dietary fats and cardiovascular disease from the Presidential Advisory, where Frank Sachs actually looked at the entire world's literature 3 years ago and came to the conclusion that nobody should be doing saturated fat and replacing unsaturated fat to lower LDL cholesterol would reverse or decrease the amount of atherosclerosis. So this culminated with a very careful review that I did as one of the authors of the 2019 ACC/AHA primary prevention guidelines. And so it turns out that that second recommendation, because it's not randomized, again, Baxter, but we have data to say that saturated fat replacement with monounsaturated fat and polyunsaturated fat will actually be beneficial to reduce atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. So that's in our guidelines. And so I think people were kind of upset a few days ago when this new article came out talking about how this should be reassessed and how it was all wrong. And when I tried to answer your question, Baxter, about what's wrong with it, we actually did a response. The response is 3 pages long. I probably should just stop right here, because what I did is take their disclosures, and I actually just put in red all the animal stuff that these people are being paid. They're paid by the cattlemen's industry and dairy people, and so 2 pages of disclosures full of things like ketogenic diets for royalties and books, and so this is not by any means. If I go back to this slide, there were 17 of us in the room. 100% had no conflicts of interest. No, I mean, you may have our intellectual biases that get beat up at the door, but we did not have any relationships with industry, none whatsoever. And so if you look at it, they're saying that they're recommending that to get rid of this 10% limit on saturated fat, saying that saturated fat actually will increase your LDL cholesterol, but it increases your fluffy LDL. That's one that I should just take on verbally now. Well, it turns out that if you look at it, small, dense LDL is atherogenic, no question.
Yep.
But if you take the ratio of atherogenicity and say it's like 1.6, the fluffy LDL is 1.4. And so we have data on that. And so, the group, and I'm going to give credit to the people on the ACC nutrition work group. We actually did send a letter that was received by JACC yesterday, really talking serious how they could publish something as the state of the art that A, conflicts with the ACC's own guidelines, A, and B, actually is so full of relationships with industry, such as to make it very unlikely that this was an unbiased review. And so what you're seeing here, their recommendations, I think we probably can discount them. If I have a few more minutes, I'll just keep going, and if that's all right with you.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Good. I do want to hit on some of the dietary patterns. This is going to be like the lightning round of what people are doing now and whether it's killing them or not. And the answer is mostly yes. So the Regards trial, I have to start there. I'm an African-American from the south side of Chicago. And when they talk about the Southern diet, that's what I grew up with. And this is what it looks like. And it's Mississippi, Alabama, it's the stroke belt. And that's what they were looking for. This is University of Alabama, Birmingham. But this Southern diet was definitely migrated to the north with us. And, this putting animal products in every vegetable, neck bones, ham hocks, high in saturated fat, a lot of sugar, sweet tea, that sort of thing. Not just yams, but candied yams. And so when you look at that, it results in more heart disease, more stroke, more kidney disease. And that's the problem that we've had that we need to really work on. The next pattern I would talk about has to do with the avoidance, that things that are in the American diet, that people just knew this one article, that sure, at the bottom, unprocessed meat, more than like 14 grams, which is, if you did the OK sign, that would be about how much red meat you could get away with without showing up as an increased mortality. But there's some on this list, like sugar sweetened beverages. They say you shouldn't do a high amount. Well, what was high? It was more than 0. So that's any ever. And same thing with processed meat. And so we have dietary things, sodium more than 2,000 milligrams, that were definitely associated with mortality. If we could just get this word out there and have people change, and the simplest thing is to do a whole food plant-based diet, and that takes care of the whole thing. The next one that I have to worry about is the vegan diet, because when I'm going around, just like you do, Baxter, and your people are interviewing you and asking you to be at a conference, and you're looking around you, what you see is that, I don't know, maybe 1/3 or 1/4 of the people are concerned about cardiovascular health. The rest are concerned about global warming and environmental issues and animal rights issues. And I think those are wonderful concerns. It's just that it leads to some plant-based diets that are not healthy whatsoever. So sure, French fries are vegan, but they're not healthy vegan. The juices and sweet beverages, and the cold press, we'll have to look at that data. But this publication says, and again, this is the Harvard group, says that all of those things on a plant-based diet that are unhealthy increase mortality substantially. And if you look carefully at that rightward graph, the red line is the increase in coronary heart disease incidence with animal products, and the dotted line is actually above it. That's a bad vegan diet with a lot of refined carbohydrates and the like.
Yeah, I talk to the compassionate vegans, and I tell them, number one, the first environment you need to take care of is your personal environment. Yep. And the number one animal you need to be compassionate to is the human animal. So if you serve someone some fried okra, fried, cauliflower, and you give it to another human, that you're not being compassionate to a human animal. And so I think we need to take that into consideration. What we consume has to take care of our local environment, our most local environment. That's our human frame. And then our own personal animal is ourselves and our neighbors and other human beings. But anyway,
it's so well said. And I resonate with that completely. I won't say which vegan fest. I was just impressed with how everybody had a person or two, except for the vegan ice cream on top of the vegan donut thing. That line was going way back. I guess it's what people like, but it really we need to get the word out, just like you just did. Sorry, I had to move ahead to the Atkins slide because I couldn't stand looking at those cut animals anymore. So it's really I think those animal rights people have gotten to me. I want to talk, the next pattern I want to talk about for a moment is the ketogenic diet. It got popular because it works for weight loss. There's no question about it. The question is, as a cardiologist, that there's been data out here. This is 13 years ago. This is not American. I'm sorry. The publication is the joint between Harvard and the University of Athens. That if you're doing this low carb diet, you're putting yourself at risk. This was about a 22% increase in mortality that they saw. This one is actually from Japan. And they actually put their own data and analyzed it, put it all together, and said it's a 31% increase in mortality if you do that ketogenic diet. This one, which I think, because it is for U.S. communities, enrollment in the ERIC trial, which everybody has respect for, they looked at both sides of the equation, is the high carbohydrate and the low carbohydrate diet. And what they found is that low carb diet increased mortality substantially unless you did it with plants. And I know that started a big controversy in the vegan world, people doing nuts and olive oil and peanut butter. Apparently, it actually does work. And in this data set, it was associated with an 18% decrease in mortality if you did a plant-based low-carb diet, as opposed to the animal-derived fat or protein, 18% increase in mortality. Now, this is general population obese people. Suppose you were to, and this is what the curves look like, and I have to mention, just like the Pure trial showed, if you increase the amount of carbohydrates, and it's not the complex carbohydrate with high fiber, it does increase mortality. But this curve, the slope, is not nearly as bad as doing a low-carb diet. Okay, but I wanted to mention this one because it's something that everybody should know. If you're in cardiology, you're treating patients who have had a heart attack. If those people try to lose weight with an animal-sourced and low-carb diet, it increases their mortality by 53%. So if people don't take anything else away from this talk, it would be nobody should be doing a low-carb diet for any length of time unless it's done with plants. And if they're not doing it with plants, please don't have pre-existing coronary heart disease. This was actually evaluated by really good groups because that Jack article from a few days ago is sort of pushing, a lot of those people were pushing the ketogenic diet, but it raises your cholesterol, it raises your inflammation while it's making you lose weight and improving your glucose. And so that increase in cholesterol and inflammatory markers is very clear. This is the kind of stuff that makes coronary heart disease, stroke, and mortality. This was actually reviewed by Carol Kirkpatrick's group, a wonderful nutrition-focused person who's PhD at University of Idaho, who I once debated. I was against ketogenic and she was for it. And the data is so clear that she's now the first author on the Please Don't Do a Ketogenic Diet, saying exactly the same thing. that you're going to ruin your cholesterol, you're going to increase your inflammation while you're making your diabetes and your weight better. What's wrong with it? Well, it's clearly that it's got meat, and red meat kills. Processed red meat kills faster. It's dose related. The more you eat, the more you die. And we talk about heart attack, stroke, and death all the time. We should be talking about heart failure as well, because processed and unprocessed red meat increase mortality for heart failure absolutely tremendously, 243% increase in incidence. Now, the last pattern I want to talk about really quick is the Mediterranean diet. And I know that's very controversial because I know so many scientists who are working with this and believing that it's the right thing to do. But I just want to point out that, forget about the retraction and the republication, the randomization, all the issues that they had. It's a good study. It's a model for the way studies should be done. And this is what it showed. If you look in the upper left, it's about a 30% reduction in heart attack, stroke, and death from cardiovascular causes. But if you look below at frame B, the Mediterranean diet did not save lives. Okay, the mortality differences did not reach statistical significance. There was a trend that hazard ratio of 1.12. There was a trend for the nut portion of the Mediterranean diet to actually increase mortality. What I'm showing on the right is actually the table, because people's jaw drops. Why would the U.S. News and World Report say that this is the #1 diet for health if nobody's life is saved by it? And all you're doing is saving stroke, which is the stroke reduction was great. You can see that when you blow up that table, 42 or 49, 32, 58. That's actually pretty darn good. But myocardial infarction, the heart attacks, the death for cardiovascular causes, the overall number of deaths. Well, you put your husband on the Mediterranean diet, and at least they didn't die of a stroke, but they're still dead. And the deaths actually did not decrease at all. And numerically, they were actually higher. So we have to be very respectful for understanding that what this data really shows. I love the methodology. The execution was stupendous. The results are not what people seem to think it is. It's very clear. It does not save lives. It doesn't lower cholesterol, and it doesn't lower heart attack rates. Now, I've been complimenting them while I'm tearing them to shreds. Let me compliment them some more. This is one of the publications where they asked the question, well, suppose you take that Predimed thing and we deliver the olive oil and we deliver the nuts, but people tend to eat more vegetarian. What happens? So they divided the group into 5 quintiles, and it goes from no mortality benefit to a 42% mortality benefit if you look at the difference between quintile 1, the least amount of vegetables, and quintile 5, the most. And so this is really remarkable. People should, if they're going to do a Mediterranean diet, they should do a vegetarian diet. Okay, why is that? It's because there are no safe animal products. That's really the bottom line. This is, again, the nurse's health and the health professional follow-up. If you have any risk factors, I have to throw that in there. I throw the abstract in there for completeness. 1 unhealthy lifestyle factor, okay? If you have risk factors, every consumption of every animal product increases mortality. And this 6% increase that you see with poultry and fish that were part of the staples of the Mediterranean diet, that 6% is only when you substitute 3% of the food energy with vegetables. So if you do it completely, as you saw, you get more than 6%. Just replace it all, and you can get like a 42% reduction. But what I like about it is that it gives you the rank order of danger of how bad animal products are. So the poultry and the fish, about a 6%, a little bit more for dairy. Red meat is worse. Eggs are worse than red meat, and processed red meat, that is the ham and the bacon and the sausage and the hot dogs, is worse than absolutely anything, except maybe the arsenic and cyanide I mentioned before. Okay, all right. So let me show you this title just for a second, and then I'm going to turn it over back for questions and answers. To stare at that title for a moment. Okay, got it? All right, then I'm going to go forward. Same title, same journal, 3 years later. Completely different group. This is actually Japanese. And their data, again, confirmed that for cardiovascular disease, there are no safe animal products. The only real big difference is that they didn't have enough events for a lot of these to get to statistical significance. And red meat and processed red meat were equally disastrous in terms of cardiovascular mortality. So again, there's really not much in the way of, uh, of reason to eat animal products because they are not good for human health. Now, I could actually go on another 5 minutes and include things like the church intervention, but I also want to be respectful of the need to interact. So you tell me, should we like split the difference? The next.
Yeah, split the difference. Give us a couple minutes because I'm aware of what you and Terry Mason did at the church briefly, but show us some of the data.
All right, here we go. So I won't spend too much time talking about protein. I just mentioned that if you're getting your protein from animals, you're getting TMAO. If you're not familiar with it, please write down those 4 letters. Look at New England Journal of Medicine. You will be vegan by the time you're done with your reading because you don't want the heart attack, stroke, death, or heart failure that's associated with it. So we did a plant-based intervention that was based on the ACC/AHA guidelines. As I mentioned earlier, getting rid of saturated fat, more vegetables and fruits, decreasing cholesterol. Sneaking that into the guidelines, reduced amount of cholesterol taken to its extreme would be a totally plant-based diet, of course. And getting rid of processed meat, refined carbohydrates, sweetened beverages, and to avoid trans fats, which is much easier than it was in the past. So those are our most recent ACC/AHA guidelines. And we actually tried taking a diet and going into an African-American church on the south side of Chicago. And it happens to be the one that became famous not because President Obama went there, but because of Jeremiah Wright, who was pastor at the time. That was a long time ago during the campaign and all of his comments. Well, he's no longer in the leadership, and they're very focused on trying to change things for the community. And so we had a bunch of volunteers to actually receive 5 weeks of whole food, plant-based diet delivered to their homes, just heat and eat. And we saw some remarkable results. One of the highest statistically significant ones was actually on the right. It's the hemoglobin A1C. It looks like a tiny amount, 6.2 to down to 6.0. But it was so consistent that that was the highest p-value because it happened to just about everybody.
What period of time was that? 5 weeks?
5 weeks.
Yep. Yeah, we did that for over 10 years in just 4 weeks, reduction in hemoglobin A1C. And I'll share my thoughts why once you're done.
Please, absolutely. So as it turns out, the blood pressure dropped 10 points, the weight dropped 10 points, the glucose dropped, body mass index, of course, but the biggest drop is my friend, the insulin, went down 43%. Now, I mentioned the TMAO, and I know everybody put that in their phone, and you're going to look it up, but that thrombogenic correlate with cardiovascular death and mortality, heart failure, stroke, heart attack, went down 43% when you change your microbiome because you stop eating animal products. So the small dense LDL went down, and sure enough, the LP little way went down 10%, just like Dr. Montgomery said it would. So we actually did have, in summary, we didn't have 100% compliance. We had adherence at about 93%. Unfortunately, this was a Lent study. We started at the beginning of Lent and ended it on Easter. And people who said they would show up were out of town on Easter after they took 5 weeks of food. So we lost a number of people. But out of those 44 people, that church was lighter. That was 440 pounds that they lost. The lipid fractions, all of the markers were improved. Now, what we did, we took this data and stuffed it into the ASCVD risk calculator. I hope everybody has that. It's a wonderful party tool. Uncle Joe, tell me, what's your LDL? And you put all the parameters in, and it tells you the 10-year risk. Well, it turns out if you look at the most recent CDC data, the African-American population has a 21% increased cardiovascular mortality over whites, okay? Well, just in 5 weeks, just looking at the risk factors, we eliminated 19% of that risk.
Wow.
And just with everything that we were able to do. And so I think it might exceed that if down the road when people are lighter and their knees don't hurt as much because they're not carrying as much weight and they're doing exercise and the like. So I think we really do have an opportunity in our African-American community to do all the things that would stop this cacophony of renal disease, stroke, heart failure, heart attack, and COVID-19 all in one fell swoop. if we lower the cholesterol, the obesity, the hypertension and diabetes with whole food plant-based diet.
Wow, wow. Everybody give Dr. Williams a digital applause there. Just say that's a digital manual. Thank you very much. What, it's just fascinating data. I don't know where to begin. I think you guys were other than us, you were the only ones to show a reduction in Lp(a). I mean, when we did our study and published, and we saw like a 16% drop. Now, we used a raw food diet and got it all from our kitchen. So they were 100% raw with 87% compliance. Now, raw meaning up to dehydrated, but nothing was cooked above 200 degrees.
Wow.
And Jenkins has shown data showing raw versus cooked whole plant vegan diet versus other. And I think raw gets an advantage certainly in a short period of time. And we've had success in some of our more acutely ill patients. And so we saw a 16% reduction in Lp(a). But that comment and the hemoglobin A1C, we get the question. I mean, you saw it in 5 weeks, we see it in 4 weeks. And everyone said, well, that's an average of 3 months data. So why you get it in such a short period of time? And my theory is that you're decreasing the fluctuation of blood sugars. And we haven't looked at this specifically, but I think what's happening is that your postprandial blood sugars are being reduced on a whole food plant-based diet. And and that's the other thing that influences hemoglobin A1C is fluctuation in blood sugars. That's the only thing you can affect effectively in just a month and have an impact on it. We've been seeing that for over 10 years.
That's interesting. In med school, that was what I used to do, isoelectric focusing of hemoglobins. And so I got, the way I try to explain it to my patients, what I was doing in that lab is you've got cornflakes and you have sugar frosted flakes. And so your red blood cells are sugar frosted based on how much it's exposed to. And the reason that it lasts and it reflects a long period of time is the half-life of a red cell is 28 days. And so it really is going to give you a good measure of what's been happening over a much longer period of time than that random blood sugar that we do that is affected by that donut you had last night when you were supposed to be fasting.
Well, anyway, hey, anybody on the panel want to have any questions for Dr. Williams? I can blow up the screen, but I don't want to take up too much time. Let me see. The audience is just saying awesome information. Everybody's just overwhelmed. So
I wanted to ask Dr. Williams something, to comment on something. I'm pediatrics, so I always think about the children. And I wanted you to comment on how this, I know it does apply to children, because a lot of people have the tendency to think that their children are protected from certain illnesses, especially cardiovascular disease, because they're young.
Yeah.
And so they, say, well, it's okay if my child has donuts for dinner every night because this doesn't affect children. But can you please comment on that?
So I'm going to say 3 things. One is we're very disappointed last year to see autopsy studies. We knew about the autopsy studies from the Korean War, 18-year-olds who were killed in the war finding plaque in their coronary arteries on the American diet. We'd known that data since the 50s. What I didn't hear until last year was that 3-year-olds now have plaque in their arteries. So first of all, there should be no autopsies on 3-year-olds. That just shouldn't happen. But the fact that our diets and switching, particularly the cow's milk prevalence, really makes a difference. And so, no, the children are they're beginning. And it's not just plaque, it's type 2 diabetes in 10-year-olds. This is what we're facing with the American diet. A lot of it has to do with the dairy because there's so much growth hormone, 16 times the amount of human milk growth hormone in cow's milk. Cow's milk is supposed to make a calf huge, quick, and it's not supposed to be for humans. The second point I would make is that there have been studies that show that if you raise your kid vegan, that they have a 16-point higher IQ, okay? But I think that's biased data. It just means their parents are smarter. The last one would be, there's a review from a few years ago from a wonderful colleague in Australia. She's in Sydney, Kate Marsh. And Kate actually reviewed the entire world's literature on vegetarian diets in children, coming to the conclusion that it's not only safe, but preferential to avoid chronic illness.
Wow. That's powerful. You know, I've read where there have been some case reports of them finding atherosclerosis in babies in utero. I need to find I think there was one or two case reports of that, but I'll have to look that up and find my sources on that. But it's which again, it starts with what the mom's eating.
Yep, absolutely.
Pregnant mom's eating. Wow, this is very powerful stuff. So. Your parting words. We're coming up on our last minute here. What do you say to your patients that come into your office and have coronary disease or survivors? And I'm going to put our audience in your exam room and kind of give us some parting words. I think we have an idea, but if you kind of sum it up for us.
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that. And so I collect catchphrases. I actually write them down in my phone after these things come out of my mouth. I said, where did I get that one from? One of the more recent ones, I'll just tell you two quick ones. There's a guy who actually came to me on plant-based nutrition after his heart attack, and he wanted just support and great, everything's going fine. And I see him, and he looks overweight, and his blood pressure is higher, and his cholesterol is higher. And I say, what happened? I said, well, this thing happened, that thing happened. I started eating animal products again, and I looked at him and I said, this is what has happened to you metabolically because of the change that you made. I need you to make decisions on a daily basis as if you want to live the next day.
Huh.
Okay.
Wow.
So anyway, that was the simple one. The one that if I had 45 seconds, I tend to do when someone has had a cardiac event and they're coming to me, and I say, I'm going to have the silliest conversation you've ever had. If you just give me 2 minutes, at the end, you'll understand why. And they say, okay. And I say, okay, so tell me, what's your understanding of why you needed that stent? And they say, well, doc, it's because I had a blocked artery. That's right. What is it blocked with? Plaque? That's right. What is plaque made out of? Cholesterol and fat? That's right. And where did the cholesterol and fat come from? Ooh, I ate it. And then I hand them a plant-based diet and say, go forward, and we're not going to do this again. I know I have a lot more success with that approach, getting the patient to connect the dots of how they've done this to themselves and their families. And I actually share with them usually, I don't name names anymore. I had it in my talk and I realized I just can't keep doing that. That the leading cause of death of heart doctors is still heart disease. And because we're not changing our diets.
Wow.
And I say that, you can make a choice right here and now. You can do what I'm asking you to do, and you're going to do so much better. Or you can ignore everything I said, and we'll make more money. It's up to you.
Wow, that's impressive. It's like having the leading cause of death in psychiatry being suicide. It's kind of an amazing thing. But guys, we as always, there's never enough time when there's a great topic, especially like this. I want us all to thank Dr. Williams for a wonderful presentation and wonderful discussion. And guys, we thank you for joining us tonight here on Beyond the Script. As always, until next week, we want you to keep it fresh, natural, and live. Next week, Dr. Palmer is going to be talking to us about the benefits of sleep. We have rearranged that talk until next week. So anyway, send your questions in advance, and we'll be looking forward to seeing them and addressing them. So until next week, y'all be careful and stay well.